It's 4 p.m. West Coast time, and this is an experiment that we're starting called Quarantime. It's really come about because in this crisis moment, we are physically distanced, but trying to find more ways of social connection than ever. You can almost see all of us humans struggling to use all of these tools, recreating how do we have dinners with people, spend evenings, how do we drive innovation when the innovation community is about random connections and conferences and meetings. I've sometimes felt like being called to national service and that the flat-footed soldier that can't go because I have to stay home. But of course, we all have to stay home. So much of the national conversation that we're seeing right now, if you tune into MSNBC or CNN, is this immediate crisis bit about what the Federal Reserve is doing, what national and local leadership is doing immediately. But just under the surface, there is so much stuff going on in the innovation community of people everywhere trying to figure out how do we change the nature of media? How is the synthetic biology community responding? How are we speeding up the testing of these of mechanisms? I don't think I've ever seen a time of this much innovation going on all at once. And the idea behind Quarantime is to perhaps provide some connections, some conversation, and ways of exploring this, and also just sharing so many of the mechanisms that are going on around the world. In my case, it was perhaps just a week ago on Saturday night that my friend Erica Blair and several other people started calling attention to site distance resistance. This was actually put up a couple weeks ago. It was how do people respond and build new connections in all of this. Of course, one of the things everybody found is it wasn't distance resistance. It was this is the resistance of social connection. How do we build connections while staying more apart? And then at the same time, just a week ago, a whole group of people came together and started thinking through how do we use social media to speed up the rate at which people actually heed the bit about staying home. If you've been following the news, there are these accounts of people in Florida who are flocking to the beaches. And if you look at the math of this basically states the faster we're not in contact with each other, the faster we can slow the spread and have a chance of fighting it. And so here you can see Erica Blair and a whole team of people from around the world created this bug, which then Facebook approved, which has now led to kind of literally a global group of people working together on all of this. And then today I posted on the distance resistance page, how are people developing new routines and patterns? And just a flurry of people coming up with new forms of rituals and spiritual practice and meeting. So this is all happening very much in real time. And at the same time, big leaders in the innovation community are thinking things through. And I wanted to convene some of those today. So in this first experimental show that we're doing, joining us will be Mickey McManus, who is, let me turn this screen off and turn Mickey on. Welcome, Mickey. So we have Mickey McManus, who is a maker, was at Autodesk for many years, and was an Autodesk fellow and is a BCG. And Mick, you've been working with all sorts of tools to experiment how we're doing our work differently. And you've also been working very closely with our friend Andrew Hessel, who is a synthetic biologist. Andrew, welcome.
Hi.
The two of you are extraordinary makers, and perhaps we should start off with an interesting component of the maker community, how the synthetic biology world is viewing this and beginning to adapt to the change, both in the short term and in the longer term picture of this world that's more exposed to pandemics.
Well, I can say that this is the first outbreak that is really is digital. Like this is we got information coming from China very early on that something strange was happening on the epidemic front. How the Chinese dealt with it was global news. But very shortly after the outbreak started in Wuhan, the Chinese scientists published the genome sequence of the virus itself. And So even before any physical samples of virus had been sent to labs outside of China, the world had access to essentially the code of the virus. And for genetic scientists and for synthetic biologists, that was all they needed to really start the analysis machine really cranking. So within a very short period of time, the bioinformatics scientists were dissecting the genome of the virus and trying to understand essentially the clues of where it came from, how it came into human society, why it was infecting us. Synthetic biologists started to manufacture fragments of the viral genome to turn into proteins that could be used for diagnostics and ultimately for vaccine development. And even going to the point of being able to synthesize the complete virus genome and essentially teleport the virus from China into labs around the world so they could start culturing and growing the virus and making modified versions of it for vaccines. So this is really an amazing time. This is really the first virus that's playing out in near real time using digital tools, and we're getting a tremendous amount of information flooding in from the bottom, to help us understand what's happening, seeing what's happening in the clinics, and really a whole community discussing how it could, they can work together to mitigate the virus and move on.
This also must mean that there's something going on in digital sharing and collaboration in a very bottom-up mechanism that we've not seen before, and probably not in a crisis. And Mickey, not only are we collaborating differently, but it's almost like we have a yearning for slightly different tools. I mean, I've noticed we want Zoom, but we want collaboration streams, but we need the emotional connection of being in a meeting, and then we need a facilitator. You're seeing very different patterns, and we should point out that for years you've been leading innovation mechanisms at Maya and at Autodesk. So I'd love to hear the two of you talk about how collaboration is changing right now, and then we can expand it to seeing it in so many other arenas.
Well, it's a great question. I think collaboration has always been something that humans do, and humans have always been makers. Like, we build tools. That is what makes humans humans. We've got this opposable thumb and we can make stuff. And every time we make something, it shocks us. It's kind of like, uh-oh, Bob invented fire. That's not good. Or Susan invented the wheel, and now we've got to cope with all the stuff rolling around, and she just ran over my foot. And so we've always been makers. It's what defines us as humans. We've always made tools and made things. And I think, in a sense, right now, necessity is the mother of invention. What we're seeing is every human is jumping in and saying, okay, how can I cope, either deal with it with my family and friends, or my own well-being and my own inner space, or how can I collaborate differently? And I have always said that, in a sense, one of the things that I love about getting people together in a room is if I hand them a marker, if I hand them a whiteboard marker and say, draw what you mean, they sort of draw blobs for nouns and they draw arrows for verbs, and it collapses all the discipline jargon from everybody else. It's sort of this thing of getting it out of your head. And unfortunately, it's really hard to do that today. So now we're starting to experiment with how could we have a shared cognitive whiteboard that's infinite and that spreads around the world, because we need to get these different disciplines to play together. Andrew is doing amazing things in synthetic biology, but it's likely that the real answer isn't only going to come from one deep technology or one collection of startups in that space, synthetic biology and the biological science. It could be that it's going to get knocked from left field with quantum computing. It could be that it's going to come from another direction with Industry 4.0, where they're using robots to assemble these things to actually synthesize new kinds of cures for the virus and things like that. And so we have to find ways that we can collapse all the jargon and all the disciplinary stuff and look at deep interdisciplinary collections. And how do we collaborate together and have sort of a shared cognitive approach? And today's tools, even this tool here, it's a little tough to do it with. It's not like we can just draw together.
Yes, so true.
But I've been drawing while we're talking, and I'll continue to do it for the course of this session because it's a part of the experiment. You know, Andrew joined.
I have
and he
just
said,
brought in your drawing screen, so perhaps you should tell us a bit about what you're coming up with there.
You bet. You know, if you just saw, we just kind of entered the world. Andrew started talking about this is the first virus. We synthesized it. We converted it to bits. We shared it around the world via teleportation. It's starting to be used immediately for diagnostics and synthesis. And we're starting to see this kind of thing in near real time. And I'll say one of the things that's been really interesting in this is yesterday, Andrew and I or the day before, we were brainstorming a bit. And Andrew said something about this is like the World War III. Andrew, can you talk a little bit more about that? And maybe Peter, leave up my whiteboard and we'll just kind of draw as he talks. Because I want to poke you on that, Andrew. What do you mean by this is World War III?
Yeah, well, I want to clear. We've had one example of a pandemic of this type with the particular features, and it was the 1918 influenza, which was misnamed the Spanish flu, but it was the 1918 influenza, and this, it was an interesting set of dynamics. But the war, the Great War, the First World War had just ended. And this virus started to spread around the world as soldiers returned home. And it ended up killing something like 5 times the number of people that were killed in the Great War. So really, the First World War was kind of the warm-up act for the 1918 influenza.
Wow.
Now that being, yeah, which is pretty big. And so what we're actually seeing now is the entire world coming to a war footing to fight this virus. And the difference here is we're not fighting each other. The entire world, every country, every individual has a common enemy. And it's this alien life form that we call a virus, which is a tiny molecular machine that is only about 100 nanometers in size, but is capable of replicating in our bodies, and thus creates a biological chain reaction that is mushrooming around the world. It's literally an atomic scale bomb.
Wow.
And we are so unfamiliar with the idea of a world war where the whole world has to mobilize to fight a battle. That's lost in our history now. Most people, even with the Second World War, are kind of,
Also, this notion that we're all on the same side of this thing, I think, is completely new in the human experience.
Yeah, this is the first time there's been a world war where we're all on the same team because we're fighting an alien.
And if you look at the irony here, we've obviously, the moment that preceded this immediately was the moment of the greatest opposition that we've had, internally, politically, in terms of polarization, nationalism going on around the world. We created this moment where the last thing you would expect of the species was this, but in about a week, humans are very adaptable. We started adapting, right? And so that's a remarkable thing, I think, that you're seeing. Another thing is we're looking at our tools differently. Heading into this, we lamented that social media was polarizing, and there was Russian bots, and there was what it did to the election, and Tristan Harris and Roger McNamee were out there like, here's what's going to happen. All of a sudden, this same cast of characters are working together, realizing this is almost a precious moment that these same tools are being used differently and to bring us together, which is remarkable, but precious also because we don't want to lose this, right? We somehow want to capture this way of being so that when this ends, we remember we know how to do that.
I think, Andrew, can you give a little bit background about, in this moment, you've been focusing on something, or you were focusing on something not about the coronavirus just a few short months ago. And you still think that even though this is a short-term thing, as Peter says, how do we not lose this moment? How do we actually remember what happens when we get past the initial threat? What do we kind of need in this biological century? And what's your focus at a higher level?
Well, actually, the timing of this virus in some ways is remarkable, because the entire world is just getting an education, a fast track education on virology and immunology. Because look, most of us wake up, our bodies work, biology works, we don't even think about it. You need kind of a wake up call, to pay attention to life. For years, I have been focused on making designer viruses. I work in a field called synthetic biology, where we literally design and build genetic programs and run them in cells. And over the last few years, the technology has gotten sufficiently good that we can basically design and build any virus from scratch. Now, this is a really powerful tool because viruses are used for things like vaccine development and gene therapies. And in the case of the company that I co-founded, we make viruses that kill cancer cells as specifically as any targeted therapeutic. We literally can design the virus to infect a particular cell type and kill it. And that's really amazing. But it's also scary when you realize that this coronavirus has, which is not very large, it's about 30,000 nucleotides of genetic code, has brought superpowers to their knees in just a few weeks. And so this is kind of the wake-up call that we need to understand viruses. We need to learn how to harness them. We need to learn how to secure the world from these natural pandemics, but also, realize we need kind of a whole new architecture, given that synthetic virology is coming online, to put in some sort of spam filter so that we can feel safe again.
It feels like, you mentioned 30,000 nucleotides of code. I have no idea what a nucleotide is. I think I probably need to go back to my chemistry classes. But I think you use that sometimes interchangeably with bits.
Yes,
or base pairs.
Absolutely, bits. Bits, nucleotide base pairs are all the same. The computer code, even though it's not written this way, reduces to zeros and ones. Genomic code reduces to 4 chemical bits, A, T, G, and C, and all life on Earth essentially reduces down to nucleotides. Now,
well, you said in some ways that a virus is inert. It's like an app, and it's kind of like a USB stick. It plugs into the cell, and then it kind of convinces the cell to run on its operating system. So you're talking about 30,000 bits. That's probably smaller than a blank Word document or a blank Google document that brought all of the nations to their knees. It's pretty high leverage, this new alien world and the atomic scale enemy. So how big is a human? Just so I can understand, 30,000 bits or base pairs is a virus. How big is a human? How many bits is a human? Just so that we have a scale, bounding here.
Well, and the size of the genome is a very rough measurement, but the human genome diploid has 6 billion bits of code. Every single cell, and you have about 50 trillion cells. But that's kind of irrelevant. Probably the best way to look at it is just the size. Like we are, give or take between 1 and 2 meters in size. If I use metrics, sorry, I'm a scientist. But
you're from Toronto, I can tell.
But this is a particle that's roughly 100 nanometers or 100 billionths of a meter. Like you can't see it with a light microscope. You need an electron microscope. So it is an incredibly small invader that works at a scale of matter that is completely unfamiliar to us. But the thing that just blows me away is here's this little nanoscopic machine, which in the absence of a cell is inert. It is really a piece of genetic software. But all of the world's armies and weapons and all the satellites and sensor systems that we have are totally ineffective, and presidents and generals are reduced to physical distancing and hand washing for their defenses.
Andrew, I've got a couple of questions. I'm sure people are curious. We're We understand that a vaccine might be a year, 18 months away. We understand that there might be antivirals. What does innovation look like in your community right now? What are all these synthetic biologists doing? What might we hope to see? Kind of what are people are coming up with, or what's a roadmap that's emerging?
So I can't speak for the whole community, but I've been trying to drink from the fire hose and get samplings here and there. What I'm seeing is an incredible energy, one, to ramp up genetic testing. So the type of testing that they're rolling out now looks for the particle itself by essentially looking for the genetic material of the particle that the particle carries, the genome. And so that type of testing is really important to identify whether you have this virus or a flu or a cold, because the symptoms for most people are pretty similar. Now, in the early days of an outbreak, this type of testing is really important because you can identify someone as being positive and quickly take a look at who they may have exposed and therefore contain the infection very quickly. And we certainly saw that happen in China and some of the Asian countries. Unfortunately, the lag in testing here in the United States and some other areas really has limited the utility of that type of testing. But the fact that this, we're seeing testing ramp up, again, as I said, because the genome was put online, people started making new types of diagnostics. For example, serological tests that can look to see whether you've got antibodies. In other words, you've been exposed, maybe you had no symptoms, maybe you had really mild symptoms, but your body produced an immune reaction, and now you can find the antibodies to the virus, and effectively you're immune. It's like you've been vaccinated. We've got other groups that are now looking at, well, how do I actually make a vaccine? And there's a variety of ways of doing that. You can take a key antigen. In most cases, it's the spike protein from this virus, which is a common protein. And you use that to create essentially to prime the immune system to make antibodies. That's great. Other people are making what's called an attenuated virus. Essentially, you make the whole virus, but you cripple its genome so it can't really replicate quickly. But now you've got a clone of the virus, like the weak twin of the virus, that you can now use as a vaccine. And you were seeing, that's just kind of on the genetics and the synthetic biology front. But we're seeing data scientists come in and analyze multiple isolates of the genome and track its evolution over time. We're seeing other people go through case histories and look for common patterns. We're seeing other people scan the genome for susceptibility. We're seeing people data analyze things like CT scans and make AI tools that can more quickly identify whether the disease is progressing to a pneumonia or more serious state. So we're just seeing all this energy come in, plus the layers of communication to kind of build robustness in our communities, to help people.
Well, and it seems there's a whole community out there, Synth Bio Beta or Synth Beta Bio, that is kind of bringing together these deep tech startups and saying, hey, how can you use like robots inside of a shipping container to actually be able to assemble things? So it's sort of a maker, a hacker kind of thing. But you're also seeing people saying, how do we mobilize academics? And how can they actually, who maybe never felt like what it feels like when you were at Amgen, you were able to see the thing you worked on cure a disease, help somebody. But academics often are farther away from this. But right now they're jumping in and saying, hey, we can help with diagnostic labs. We can run some things. We can get involved as well. And that feels like an important part in there. Do you see something different happening with academics and policymakers in this space?
Well, I can't speak for policymakers, but with the academic, one academic that I know reported to me, like he was so energized because this was the first time he could see that the work he was doing could directly save a life in a short period of time. And that was remarkable. But yeah, I like I've seen the like there's stories on the news of the folks that 3D printed a valve for a ventilator to keep them working. Makers in general are coming up with all sorts of different ideas, to keep things going. Even just, the idea of putting just vinyl circles on the floor of stores to keep 6 foot distancing between customers, as they're lining up to pay. Really fascinating ideas coming and being tried very quickly. That's great.
So I want to ask one last question, or maybe just frame this and then hand back to Peter. Sorry, Peter. But I think what's interesting is there's almost this surplus capacity because of the maker movement, because of maker fairs, because of things that Peter's reported on in terms of maker cities, how everyone has democratized the ability to have a 3D printer for Christmas with your kid in some places, and they're less than $1,000 in some cases, and we're starting to see this excess capacity, this surplus, being kind of redirected towards wartime use. In this case, fighting the virus, and we need to be very careful, right? We need to make sure that the professionals, the people who are really masters at this, help, because this is life we're talking about, and we don't want to kind of go off and try to create something and say, hey, this is as good as a ventilator, but it could hurt somebody. So there's the Hippocratic oath that comes into this. But what's exciting is we've got kind of the spectrum from people who really know what they're talking about on the mastery of health, and then people who really know what they're doing in terms of the I got something I can help with, and let's activate this, and I know how to make stuff. And that's kind of an exciting moment that I'm seeing, even though it's a pretty dire moment as well for a lot of people. It's interesting to see that people are looking for ways that they can help.
I wanted to turn the conversation a little bit to the whole way that the global communities are coming together and using kind of all forms of media in new ways, right? We've seen people do yoga practices and Pilates practices and dinner times and dance parties. I know in my case, I started thinking I wanted to do something involving streaming, and then I was thinking, how do I use the tools and what's going on there? And it was actually about 2 days ago that my friend Moheeb, are you there right now? Let's see if I brought Moheeb in. Add to stream. There you are.
How's it going?
Hi, Moheeb. So Moheeb, I met because he started creating a page called Quarantine Streams. And then we started talking about how to use all of these. And of course, what you're seeing is a wide range of stuff. Last night, there was a DJ and a dance party. There was their dinner parties going on. Tell me a little bit about what you're seeing. And when you called for people to stream, what was the energy that started coming up there?
Yeah, so one of the things was, and Mickey, you were talking about how people were looking for ways to help, is when I got into the open source group for doing medical supplies, I saw a lot of opportunities to help there, being a background as a maker. But I figured the best place I think I can help was, there's mental health is a huge factor here, where we're all stuck for a while. It's going to be a few weeks, could be longer. And what are things we can do to fill that time? There's that emptiness that exists there when you don't have that casual socialization, when you're not seeing what's happening outside of the confines of your home. Watching the news, you'll start to think everything's chaos. And so a friend of mine started making a list of people who were doing yoga streams and workout routines. And I thought, okay, what if we combine these two ideas? Let's make a group, encourage people to stream. Because even if you're just cooking breakfast and you decide to do a little live stream where a number of people you might not even know can chime in or just view, it helps them. It could be that little bit of respite that brings them out of the anxiety, the collective anxiety that we're all experiencing. So I just wanted to make a spot for that, create a community. I have a habit of creating communities and encouraging people to fly with whatever they're passionate about. And that's the hope with this, whether it's, Ryan McDermott, who's a very active volunteer here in Arizona for the maker community, decided to DJ and do a party night. And so I was like, okay, we're going to live stream this and see who comes in. And it was the most fun I've ever had dancing, just being weird with people I didn't know. And it distracted us all for a moment and reminded us to stay human in this time.
So is everybody dancing kind of on their own screen in their own houses, but they could watch everybody else dancing too in their own streams? How are you doing that?
Yeah, so and that's so I was looking around for a lot of different tools, and so Ryan made it a Zoom meeting, and so I just shared the screen, so everybody would dance, and if their microphone was on, they'd get spotlighted as like the main screen, and then Ryan was just sharing his audio, and I've seen other groups have been there's the local stand-up comedy community has been doing online open mics. We've seen there's groups organizing poetry open mics, slam poetry, just people showing themselves baking. Emily Calderani who does a number of television shows around space and science. She's been streaming, just hanging out, doing various fun science projects. It's just all these little things that help. And I found personally that I think the best tool has been so far in terms of ease of use is StreamYard, which we're using right now for this live stream, and a combination of Zoom. Just having.
Yeah, I have a question here. There's a lot of these tools. I mean, a bunch of tools are designed to broadcast stuff. Like I can someone pushes comedy or musicians play. When I was out the other day doing just a little thing like this, it was completely fun because it was social again, right? I was talking to people, I was reacting, and I see people reacting now. But it feels like we're inventing something that has elements of content, but elements of social, but also it's kind of continuous. It's there when I want to tune in. The other thing that drives me nuts is suddenly I want to know about all of this, and I'm looking for a new directory structure. It reminds me of the early days of the internet, right? It was Google and Yahoo, and how do you find this stuff? I realized the other day that on Facebook, because of how the algorithm works, I see the same, 150 people or something, but I'm back in discovery mode, right? So
Yeah.
Are new mechanisms emerging here? Because it feels like we're evolving the social media medium fast.
Yeah, that's I don't think there's been a true winner yet, and I think this is a great time for people to experiment with what this looks like. It reminds me of like BBS days. It's like you have to go out and hunt and find these things, but you want it to be a singular collective space. And a lot of sites like YouTube or Twitch, they're going to show what's most popular. And that's great if you want to watch a very structured show, but again, people are hungry for that impromptu social atmosphere. It might not totally feel like it's hitting everybody yet because it hasn't been that long into quarantine. But as we move forward into it, there's going to be these little things people aren't really realizing they're missing, these little bits of sanity, where just being able to go out to a supermarket and actually interacting with someone, even if it's just a casual like, hello, what you doing? Or walking down the street and you see some artist doing something, picking out flowers for something. And we need that kind of, what I think, and I put this out to anybody who's watching, who's a builder, creator, developer, what is that going to look like? What is a good place to start categorizing and cataloging what people are streaming? Is it just to be on whatever social platform and see what pops up? And that's part of why I'm encouraging people to just stream randomly, whatever is stream often, because then you'll see it more. It'll be easier to discover. Versus right now, my feed is mostly filled with panic memes and a mixture of news sites.
Isn't it also the case though? Because what I'm noticing, at least in my own family, is we have one big messaging thing where all of my immediate family are on it, and we're worried about our dads or parents or moms or grandparents, and what I'm also noticing is kind of this push to go, hey, how do we get dad on Google Hangout? How do we get whatever? And it seems like there's this push to say it's not actually technologically hard at all. This is actually just about maybe now we need to try it. And I suspect we're not going back, right? After we've tried this stuff, the ways that we collaborate are just going to be different. And I think it spans every generation. I don't believe that this is just the 20-somethings or the 30-somethings. coming up on 55, and my dad is 87, and we were just talking this morning. He's got a Kindle in the hospital room in Chicago. He doesn't have coronavirus, but he's got pneumonia. He's trying to figure this out. We were talking about, could we get him on a video chat tomorrow or set up a Zoom event? And he's like, okay, I got to check to see if there's Wi-Fi. He's 87, but he's trying to figure this out. And I suspect we can't go back. You mentioned, I don't think there's a winner yet in terms of media. I don't think there's going to be one for a while. I think this is like, as Peter mentioned, the early days. If you've ever been at the frontier of something, there are a lot of forays out there and people don't make it back. And I think this is actually the time for every flower to bloom, and for us to be investigators of that, pay attention to that, because the new medium is still in flux.
Absolutely. Tools are jumping the shark, right? So I see Twitch, which was kind of designed to broadcast gaming, but what it's really broadcasting is how people are looking and sharing things. That I see that being used in new ways. My friend who I have been quarantining with is drawing me into the PS4 online world, and people are finding all sorts of connections through that, which is probably driving usage a great deal, right? So I'm kind of astounded by how these things at the edges. And Mickey, you've been off trying to think about how we can use collaborative whiteboards because we have to innovate. One thing that annoys me is I'm so used to either going to conferences or meeting people downtown and randomly getting ideas because that's just how the fluid world of idea works. And now I kind of feel like a caged brain in a box,
Yeah.
Which I saw in a movie once. But now the question, like, how do we recreate these kinds of things? Even this thing we're doing right now, the comments are scrolling by on a different Facebook screen, and it's kind of difficult to integrate them in here, which we'll do in a moment, right? So we're looking to glue these things all back in something new.
Yeah. So it makes me think also that as people are moving to work from home and people are looking to collaborate and still have that connection, it's sort of a thing that was solved in part, or at least it's more understood by the maker community and the open source software community. We've been working remote and we're collaborating remotely for years. And so there is this kind of, I think, personal onus on us to go out and help others learn how to collaborate. And then, like Mickey said, pay attention to what are these new pain points? Because so far, all these tools have been for people either doing business or software or CAD 3D design, but they're not designed around, say, if you're a creative or a writer, or if you're a musician and you have a band. I'm sure there are tools out there. And I think the next step will be you'll see people putting together lists and guides. I think you'll see a lot of tutorials coming out, a lot of traffic going to them on how do I do this? How do I shift my life to this collaborative spirit? And what's the best way to drive that engagement in different communities?
I just want to jump in here and just say I've got two kids. One's 2, one's 5. My 5-year-old had, I've been just totally blown away by how the teachers not only at their school, who very quickly, by surveying the parents, said, what are the online systems that your kids are using today that are really helpful? Curating that list and basically putting together a homeschool program, as well as the after-school programs like music and even martial arts. Like they're just putting their lessons online. And in fact, even though we left New York about 11 days ago, and are now, as you can see, in a rural setting in California, we're not missing school. Like it's adapting really quickly. And Mickey, to your point, I think you're right. I think once you go digital with kind of your business or your work or your social, it's really hard to go back in some ways, because these connections are pretty powerful and convenient.
I think there's a thing here though about in many corporate worlds, many organizations that are very large, people who worked from home or worked at a farm and called in were sort of second-class citizens in some ways. They were like, they weren't there, they didn't walk the halls, so the senior person didn't see them, so they weren't promoted at the time, because the real meeting didn't happen in the meeting, it happened in the hallways between the meetings. And then of course there are these natively digital groups that never had an office. And I don't know if I would describe either one of them as the best, because I think physical connection is very high bandwidth. I mean, we get so much from just being able to see the smile in your face, but we don't get that at 30 frames a second. We get that in micro expressions that flicker across your face in incredibly high speeds. We have such high bandwidth when we do get together that I think togetherness physically will become more important than ever. And the question is, how do we cherish that when we actually are together? And then how do we bring this notion of the digital or the distributed place, how do we bring that to be so that they're not second-class citizens in other ways? How do we actually help them experience and feel that they're just as relevant? Because I don't think it's us against them or the old way, the new way. Actually, the old way is kind of what Moheeb is doing right now. If you look back at the diaries from the new book, The Splendid and the Vile, which just came out, about sort of the diaries written by daily citizens of London in the first year before, or the year before America came to help with World War II, many people across the city were writing diaries across the country. And every morning, the world would check in on those diaries and check to see what was happening. But a part of it was people were getting together and playing music together. People were in the bomb shelters, in the tube stations. People were like getting back up on their feet after something horrible happened, and then just doing it. And so there's a sort of a natural way that we want to do this. And how do we cherish and natively use the physical world for what it's great for? We evolved in it over about a 3 billion year or more R&D experiment. It's a pretty cool place. And then how do we take advantage of these new technologies to maybe give us, in some senses, give everyone superpowers, like democratize this and really, really think differently about how we can actually come out of this differently. There's a sidebar to this, though, that we could come out of this worse. Those teachers should be paid $1 billion a year, not $35,000 a year. Those people who are running libraries, libraries are, in some people's framings, palaces for the people. When you walk in the door, you are accepted as a citizen of that world of information. And right now we're putting a lot on them to do their education online, to do this other stuff online, to keep open and keep the social safety nets in place. And I'm not convinced when the powers that be come to the other side, they will have rewarded those people, or they will have seen them. And I worry that many of these digital tools will have taken all their intellectual property too in the process. Those great teachers and those great, wonderful people. My mom was a biologist and a school teacher, and it was amazing to see how she worked in public schools. And I think we've all had experiences with it, but then we value the NBA superstar, and we value the lucky CEO that hit the right moment in time, and we don't value these heroes that are everyday heroes. And I think we're actually starting to see that really strongly now. But I think there is also a danger. These are powerful things, but also there's a danger that we will just accept that they did all that and never pay them another penny for it. And so how do we make sure that
in a way there's an even a more urgent version of that, which is practically every artist or musician I know now is out of work and not being paid. Visual artists don't have their galleries. So one of the questions is, what gets built now that can create subscriptions or paying mechanisms for this, and how does that continue? Many of you know I'm chairman of Gray Area, which is an art and technology center. Our last big project was on immersive place-based media. Well, we're not into place-based right now, and if we're doing immersive, it's very differently. So we're trying to figure out how do we pay those people. Well, here in San Francisco, it's a real crisis. I want to bookmark that and come back to it. Watching all along has been our friend Anna Fedorova. Anna, are you there? Well, we've asked Anna to join, who has helped produce all this and to be the voice of who's following a lot of the comments. So, are you there, Anna? Okay, well, as Anna gets ready, there have been some comments coming in. Andrew, one of the questions that came in was, there was this report that type O blood might be more resistant to the virus than type A.
I'm here, can you see me?
People are asking, why might that be?
I have not heard that or followed it up, and really couldn't comment on that in any useful way, Peter.
Okay. Anna, we lost you, so dial back in. And And while Anna's doing that, a bunch of people have been sharing a bunch of sites. So here's one called Connective Networks. Seth Godin evidently has a whole new collaborative channel going on. I know that practically every arts organization I've seen is talking about streaming art galleries and the symphony and such, doing all of that. Moheeb, on the can you tell people a little about the site to connect to that you've built that has some of the streams that are going on? And while you're thinking about wait, Anna, hold it. Let's see. Are you there, Anna?
Yes, I'm here. I my internet bugged me out because I had too many windows with video open, so I just closed everything. I'm with you. Yeah,
you and everybody else on the planet, right?
I know. I have so many broadcasts. I'm literally watching. I left an amazing DJ dance party before coming onto this thing that I'm helping host, and I've been kind of in that whole virtual reality, amazing virtual reality that we're creating right now.
So I have a question. Now. You've been watching the comment stream, and I've noticed, at least on the window I have, that they're scrolling off the top. I can't get to see them. So can you tell me a little bit about some of the comments, what people are saying, questions that are coming up, and anything you've been watching that I can't?
So I don't know what you've been watching, but the comments on this particular video, I guess I can report on. Apparently, people are just reporting on everything that's going on. There's the really interesting thing that's the most interesting thing that I've seen is the virtual museums that open via the Google Arts project. Basically, tons and tons of museums all over the world have been. Google has been collecting sort of art collections from everywhere, and they've been public for a while now. Except now that people are kind of stuck in their kind of homes as cages, this is being promoted to me by a bunch of friends who art, and you can go into like Tretyakovskaya Gallery in Moscow, and Vienna's Museum of Fun Arts, and tons and tons of museums where you can walk around the rooms.
You're seeing everyone do this all at once. I also worry that there might be a new form of information overload here.
I am definitely getting overloaded. For example, even being part of this project is like slightly overwhelming because, God, like there are tons and tons of these things. I'm getting invited, and right now I'm kind of at my parents' place, hiding out from the overwhelm from just the social life in San Francisco life, and now I'm getting like kind of bombarded by all this other amazing stuff. I was trying to kind of do a little retreat here in isolation, sort of like in an introvert's heaven, and I'm not getting that.
The irony here is, for the first day or so, it was true, there was nothing, and then suddenly there is a new form of
again in order to hear you.
The friction of the real world, that you actually have to drive somewhere or take a bus to a meeting, or you have to go to a restaurant, and then your atoms are there for 2 hours. That's all been relaxed, and it is a new thing here. Fortunately, in the world of overload, we called this thing for an hour, so we can only go on for a few more minutes. I wanted to call out a couple of other things that are going on that are related to some of the urgency stuff here. Let's see if we can bring up Jeff's screen. So my friend Jeff White's one of the many, many friends I have in our community here that's been creating an effort. And here is a community kitchen, which he's trying to create. As we get into this, there are so many people who are either disconnected or suddenly unable to afford things. So Jeff is talking a little bit about trying to find a medium to do a large catering kitchen to take over and start a community and a food distribution network. So he's looking for freezers, vans, cooking equipment, money. I mean, Mickey, in many ways, this is...
Hi, Jeff.
Huh? Hi, everybody.
I'm saying hi to Jeff.
Yes. But Mick, part of what this makes me realize is, in a way, the entire maker movement of the last decade was a rehearsal for this moment, in that we kind of got people organized with distributed tools, the wiki era with distributed making. On some degrees, all of us were a sleeper cell for this moment of creation. That's a little bit where you and Andrew started the conversation close to an hour ago.
Well, and I would say makers were in preparation. The rise of the maker movement. A lot of people a few years back said, "Well, was the maker movement just a bubble?" But suddenly, and Dale Doherty, your friend and mine, who created Make Magazine and started the movement in some ways, he just said, no, actually, it raised up a whole bunch of things, and now it's kind of permeating the land. And so he had a very different attitude towards it. I do think that the tools can go from printers that basically just watch them fail all the time because they're bad 3D printers, all the way up to major companies using them to manufacture parts of cars and parts of spaceships and rockets and things like that. So it's a very large space. And particularly with what Andrew is seeing out there, I think it'd be nice to kind of turn it to Andrew. You've seen that this moment has also energized the synthetic bio community with lots of experimentation. You and I work together as researchers at Autodesk, and you synthesized a virus that actually cured a canine cancer using CRISPR and some other things using a design tool. What are you seeing now with the kind of maker movement, but also the deep tech startup movement? All the synthetic bio companies that are spanning this gamut. What are the things you're getting most excited about in that space? Because I think that's the last piece of this, which is new kinds of industries might be rising in response.
Yeah. I think we're going to see a completely new biotech industry emerge in the wake of this, because clearly the one we have didn't protect us in advance and is too slow to even protect us fully from the course of this outbreak. So you just got to start with a blank sheet of paper. As I said, nothing anyone has was suitable for adequate biodefense here. So, but the synthetic biology community has moved very quickly to make everything from new therapeutics to diagnostics to vaccines. There are to do data analysis, crunch the genomes of who's getting it, the virus itself. So it's this incredible energy, and it's not just the big groups, not the well-funded groups. Small groups, community labs have organized, and probably one of the most sophisticated synthetic biology groups, Ginkgo, put a $25 million fund together to really help and open their construction platforms to new ideas for developing therapies and vaccines and diagnostics. So that's
Ginkgo Bioworks that's in Boston, right?
In Boston. Yeah.
And they were sort of one of the first unicorns in the synthetic biology space fairly recently. So you're saying they put out a $25 million, what is it exactly?
And essentially they opened up their platform and allocated $25 million to advance new possibilities. Government groups are advancing, doing similar things. Even my own chief scientist realizing we make viruses that hunt down cancer cells, but he recognized that our platform and the viruses that we use to do that were actually pretty well suited for making a vaccine candidate. So we put one into the pipeline as well. So, can we advance that into clinical testing? That'll we don't have the experience for that. We're looking for a partner. But it turns out that a lot of the larger groups that do have that experience are looking for candidates. So it's really fascinating to see how this plays out. And I think this changes the nature of infectious disease, for the future of humanity. If it doesn't, we're in trouble.
You said we kind of need an immunity system for the world at this point.
Yeah. Because we mix. We're just so social. There's 100,000 flights a day. People are always moving. That's a big difference from 1918, where a journey home from the war was a 2-month boat ride. We are so interconnected now, and this has been predicted, but you kind of have to live through it and get the experience to really generate change. This virus is a massive change agent.
And the impetus for putting this thing together was just realizing how much innovation and change and experimentation is going on indifferently in the last 2 weeks. And and I think that's where we want to go next with this. So, first of all, I want to thank Mickey and Anna for helping me create this. And Moheeb, you and I met completely serendipitously when you put something up, and we started talking about tools. A lot of what I've been thinking about in the last 48 hours is what tools to use, right? So we kind of got deep. What works? How do you put something like this together? What would it look like? I think some of the stuff we want to get into future versions of this is I'd love to take a look at drop in on a number of artists. How are artists responding? How are artists using data to build all of this? I put up on a big screen, I have digital art at home. I now have that big map from Johns Hopkins, and every time I pass it, you can see the infection stuff going. But it's an interesting data set for artists to work with. How are arts organizations actually thinking through how people get paid in all of this? I think there's a whole bit of life hacking that's going on. The whole bit about how do we survive this, help each other. All of my friends, many of whom are burners, and so there's a certain degree of radical self-reliance. Most of what I know that I'm supposed to do right now, I've been learning from a community of friends, some of whom were, 48 hours ahead of me in all of this. So I think we should get into that. So one of the things that maybe as we wrap up, that I'll invite all of you to, and people who are watching this and sharing, is ideas we should explore and conversations we should have, thinkers we should drop in on, and fun stuff we should just keep sharing and exploring in all of this. And
I want to make one question out here and comment. We want to also thank Andrew just for sharing so much from the synthetic biology world, and I think the initiatives going on there are amazing. One of the things that I've been doing is using a whiteboard, but this whiteboard is actually infinite, and everyone else can draw on it, or at least if we can figure out how to let everybody else draw on it, we can draw on it. So I've been experimenting with different tools. This is not related to this company at all, but I just was recommended. It's called Miro, and it has the ability to build your own APIs and plugins. But if I expand the screen, or if I keep moving on the screen, it keeps adding whiteboard material. So it can be infinite. And if somebody else draws on it, they can erase my stuff. They can add more things to it. That's what we do in a real whiteboard. And we don't have that capacity today to do that. But what if we did? What if we had the ability to kind of, zoom out and be able to see all the things that are happening over the course of time? And what if making in this way, which is getting ideas together and looking for weird connections, what if that could be another approach where we have shared cognition and shared collaboration and creativity?
Because it's all these different forms of media that we're using. I think Moheeb, you were about to say something.
Yeah, it's just I have a friend who's been calling it the art apocalypse and trying to find ways to share what he's doing. And yeah, there's I was talking with someone about maybe like working with a ticketing group of doing kind of bundled tickets, right? These ticketing groups are normally doing large events, right? So, and there's a whole gatekeeping part of that involved, but that gatekeeping is a physical space. And the next, like, for there to be monetization to these things, do you come up with some sort of micro, like humble bundles for local bands and artists? But I've seen a lot of people doing their best to donate to these artists. In these times, they know that they're struggling, and there are unemployment benefits that are supposed to be coming for as part of some stimulus package. But in this time, people are trying to get like gift cards for local businesses that they'll use when they get to reopen, or they're doing their best to support. And everybody's struggling. So, do what you can. But I think the best thing in these times is to keep each other inspired and hopeful, so that when we come out of this, we're still creators. People are still going to continue doing their art, or otherwise, what are they going to transition to? Like, everything's going to change after this.
I want to thank all of you. I feel so much more connected and grounded now, just having been looking at everybody and hearing people having both good ideas and similar ideas to what I've heard. Anna, you, I know, have been thinking a lot about things we might explore and discuss here, and you're also seeing so many other people do connections. I'd love you to kind of leave us with some thoughts before we go out.
Some thoughts I may have to read from the text that I sent you earlier,
Yeah.
because I had tons and tons already. But in addition to all the amazing things in collaboration that's happening in the science community to fix the virus, to find solutions to it, to the explosion that we're seeing in sharing and the art space. Here's some other stuff. The social impact concept is being redefined from sort of like, all the startups and businesses that we've seen that have been essentially, like social impact investing, and it's been like kind of in the realm of businesses. Now it's kind of an onus that lies on all of us. Like the social impact is now literally social. Like, communities are caring for individuals, for communities, trying to figure out all the solutions that are clearly needed in general. So it's no longer just on businesses and kind of educational institutions.
I would add to that, and that's when I was having a conversation with Tristan Harris yesterday, who's part of this broader quarantine group that has been working on how to disseminate stay home and save lives. As you know, he was a big critic of Facebook and was thinking, well, how do we go build something up that has a different business model or hits some other needs, so we're not always fueling the business model that kind of deconstructs us? And then all of a sudden this thing comes along and it's like, oh, here is this precious moment in which we have a window open to how we might use these media incredibly constructively. And Andrew, this gets back to the point we're making at the very beginning. It's a world war in which we're all in it together. And an important, it's almost like a science fiction movie. We've been transported into the future, into this more virtual future that we read about and science fiction talked about, and also into the future with this disaster. We got set into it like a wormhole in time. And, hopefully we're going to come back to the present, but there's an awful lot to learn in this almost sacred wormhole moment, right, about what to do there. So that was an interesting conversation that I thought Tristan's perspective on it was. And also, before we go on, I wanted to also give another call out to this amazing effort, which is, look, the immediate triage thing to suppress this is physical distancing while fighting social distancing. That's what this whole call has been about. And if you've not done it yet, well, let's see, I'm trying to put, it says robot bedtime. There we go, there it is. But it is robot bedtime. But if you've not done it yet, you can change your Facebook frame to one of these, the Stay Home Save Lives, which if you just go to the URL quarantinenow.com, it'll give you those discussions. Andrew, you might want to just give us a quick thought on just the math of how quickly might this thing be suppressed if everybody actually followed the rules, right? Because there's been all these discussions that if we actually do physical distance, we could really slow down the rate of it doubling and perhaps make it stop. What's your thought on that?
So I want to be clear. This virus has been spreading without detection for a while. So what we're actually doing now by quarantining and physically distancing ourselves is to suppress the surge that's coming now on our healthcare system. We're going to start seeing people flood into the healthcare system with disease, and what we're trying to do now is blunt it and stretch it out. There hasn't really been a lot of discussion yet for how we get out of quarantine, because you can only really get out of quarantine if you've caught the virus and it was mild or asymptomatic and now you have antibodies. Congratulations, you're now immune. Or you've been given a vaccine. Congratulations, you've made antibodies and now you're immune. Just the fact that you haven't been exposed isn't sufficient. So we need to.
And I heard that reinfection is also possible.
That seems to be anecdotal. There's not a lot of evidence around that, and it is from what we can see, this generates an immune response just like any other virus. So it could it's more likely that it was a testing failure or the person wasn't completely out of recovery. But yeah, like there hasn't been a lot of discussion or modeling around that. So I think this, like everything else, practice makes perfect. and we haven't had a global pandemic, in the last century.
We're now, we've been on this for an hour and 4 minutes. So I think it's time to move on, because the one thing we've established is we now have so many different pieces of culture and content bombarding us, more than I can mention, but evidently they're all sitting in the comments of what's going on here. So we have a very full night ahead of us of both preparing and connecting. And I want to thank everybody, because we'll be doing more of this as we kind of came up with this idea of Quarantime in a very serious moment. Perhaps the most serious thing is connecting and innovating. So I want to thank everybody for helping us create this bit of Quarantime, and to everyone else, we'll get back when we're going to do more of it. Thank you all, and off to keep busy alone together in this moment. Thanks.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
And we'll be putting more links into what we've had here, and send us thoughts. There's going to be a lot more Quarantine to come, and I look forward to continuing this conversation. Thanks.
Let's get close, but not so close. Quarantine.